So this is not a very polished video because it's the solution video for the midterm for our Swift Heavy exam from the spring of 2021. Now, if anybody is following along with this video on YouTube and you see that there are more efficient ways of accomplishing some of these tasks, like using functional programming, well, this exam only covers concepts that we've completed in the first part of our class. So the goal was to test to make sure that students understand basic programming concepts. They have things down like variables, constants, arrays, types, functions, loops, those types of things. We've also covered structs, arrays of structs, and there's a very simple app at the end. We're going to cover more iOS programming on the next exam. So if any of my students used more advanced concepts, as long as I didn't ask for a specific technique in a question, they got full credit. But with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at the exam. Now, this exam was hands-on, in class. The students actually couldn't refer to the internet, but they did have a page front, side, and back with notes. They also couldn't pull up past examples of code that they had written. And the goal here is to make sure that students have fairly decent recall level knowledge, especially if they're going to be having technical interviews at some point. Now, our exams always have timely themes, and this one is checking the eligibility for Massachusetts state COVID vaccination phases. Now, in order to make sure that we've got some data to work with, I've actually put some data in a Google Doc, and that's this bit.ly address that you see right here. So in order to save typing, what you can do is you can copy and paste some of the things that you'll see in that Google Doc. Why don't we highlight this URL, head over to our browser, paste it in, and here we can see data that we can copy and paste. In this test, we're going to create 5 playgrounds. The first one is going to be called Phase 1. So why don't we head over to Xcode, and we'll say File, New Playground. We'll call this Phase 1. We'll save it to the desktop, and let's take a look at that first question. So we're going to want to add a comment with the label Q1, and this question says vaccine eligibility will be determined by several factors, including age. And notice that I bold-faced all of the values that are variables if a patient has certain medical conditions and their occupation. So before we write any code to check the eligibility, first we need to create variables that will hold information on a patient. So one variable will be age, which is a whole number. Now we know that means an int that will hold the patient's age. Patient conditions array, which equals a string array that will hold 0 or more health conditions that a patient currently suffers from. Note these conditions may or may not be considered conditions eligible for consideration for COVID vaccination. For example, an element of this array might contain color blindness, which is not a qualifying condition to get the COVID vaccine. And also occupation, which is a string that describes the industry that employs the patient. Now we're also going to create a Boolean value named eligible and initialize this to false. And note that you can initialize these values to any value that's appropriate, but we'll also change these when grading so that we can make sure that the code works properly. So back in our playground, we'll say var age equals, and so I'll initialize these as well. You didn't have to. I'll say age equals 76. Var, I'll paste in patient condition array, which I copied from the exam itself. Just to clear this out, and I'm going to initialize that as a string array that's going to be empty at first. So I say colon, and then in brackets, string with a capital S equals open and close brackets. Then var occupation equals empty string. And then I'll also say var eligible equals false. So on to question 2, we're going to add a comment with a label Q2, and we're currently in Phase 2, Group 1 and 2 of the vaccine rollout in Massachusetts. So we're first going to code and test to see if a person is eligible for Group 1. Now, Group 1 states that the vaccine is available to anyone who is 75 or older. So before we write code to check eligibility, we're going to create a constant, not a variable, but a constant, named Group 1 minimum age that holds the minimum age for Group 1. So add our comment for Q2, and we'll say let, since this is a constant, group 1 minimum age equals 75. And we'll put in our comment for question 3. Now in question 3, we're going to write code that examines the patient's age, and if age meets the group 1 minimum age, then we'll set eligible value to true. So back in our playground, if age is greater than or equal to group 1 minimum age, open and close curlies, and in between the clause we'll say eligible equals true. And we'll start our comment for Q4, and that says use the eligible value that you just created above, and if the recipient is eligible, then print you are eligible for the vaccine. Otherwise, print a message that also deals with the singular or plural for year or years as follows. If the patient is just 1 year away from the vaccine eligibility, print you are not old enough for the vaccine, you need to be 1 year, notice it's singular, older. Or if the patient is more than 1 year away from the vaccine eligibility, Print the statement below where X is the appropriate number of years, notice the plural, until eligibility. You are not old enough for the vaccine. You need to be X years, notice the plural, older. Note that years in the case above ends in the letter S. For full credit, use the ternary operator, which you should know how to use, to fit all the code to determine and print the year or years into 2 lines or less. So back at our playground, eligible is a bool, so we could say if eligible equals true, open and close curlies, but if we option click on eligible, again, because it's a bool, then it holds a value that's either true or false. So all we need to type in here is if eligible, open and close curly. We don't need the equals true. And if eligible equals true, well, then it'll perform what's in the curly clause that's right after if eligible. So if it's true, we'll say print, you are eligible for the vaccine. Else, open and close curlies, we'll print. And I'm just going to head back to the exam and copy that phrase and paste it in between the double quotes. And where I have this X here, I'm going to put in string interp, which is / open and close parens. Now I might say year or years, so I'm going to backspace over the S in years. I'm going to put the string interp characters there as well. And then in the line above that, so I'm going to create a constant called S. I'm going to say let S equals, and I'll use the ternary operator to turn the S either equal to an empty string, which I'll use if it's only 1 year away from eligibility, or I'll make S equal the single character for the string S if we're more than 1 year. So the way ternary operator works is the first thing that we do is we have an expression which is going to yield either true or false. So I'm going to say group 1 minimum age minus age equals 1. Then question mark. So if that group 1 minimum age minus age is equal to 1, if that's true, then what I'm going to do is pass in an empty string, so no S. Otherwise, for the false condition, you put in a colon, and then in between double quotes, I'm going to put in a lowercase s. That's it. That's my ternary operator expression. Now, in the first set of string interp parentheses, I'm going to highlight and copy group 1 minimum age minus age, paste it in there, so that's going to give me the number that I want. And then in the second set of string interp parentheses, this is where I put in S, which refers to the constant S that I created above with my ternary operator. Now, if I do a shift return to execute this code, it takes a little while, but it'll say, you are eligible for the vaccine. Excellent. But then if I head up to the Q1 area and I change my age variable from 76 to 74, then go to the end and do a shift enter, the output says you are not old enough for the vaccine. You need to be 1 year older. Everything's working great. I can change my age to 65. Do this again. It says you are not old enough for the vaccine. You need to be 10 years older. Looking good. We got our singular plural working fine here. Nice work. So now we're going to create a new Swift playground for phase 2, which is the second playground. And notice down here it says that we're going to copy code from Q1 from the playground that we just created so that we get our age, our patient conditions array, our occupation, and our eligible variable in this new playground since we're going to reuse that. So I'll return to the playground. I'll highlight that code, copy it. Then I can close this playground window, and then in Xcode under File, I'll say New and Playground. Name this phase 2, save it to the desktop. I don't need the str variable, but I'm going to paste in the code that I just copied. Nice. Now for phase 2, question 1, first we want to put in a comment that's going to say phase 2-Q1, and group 2 states that the vaccine is available to anyone who has any of the following conditions: age 65 or older, has 2 or more qualifying medical conditions, or has an occupation which is working in senior or affordable housing. So first what we're going to do is we're going to create constants that you'll use to test these conditions. So one constant is going to be group 2 minimum age that holds the number for the minimum age for group 2, that's 65. The next constant is senior or affordable housing. That's going to be a string that contains senior or affordable housing. The third constant is eligible conditions array. That's going to be a string array that contains medical conditions considered for vaccine eligibility. And you can find those in the Google Doc that I referred to at the start of the exam. And then finally, we're going to keep track of the minimum number of group 2 medical conditions, which should be equal to 2. And the reason we set this up in a constant is it's possible that the criteria would change, or you might use this for a different state where the conditions are different. And if we put all this stuff into a constant, all we need to do is change the constant instead of changing all of the lines of code where we might have a literal in there. So back in our playground, we'll put in the comment that says phase 2-Q1, and then we'll say let, and you can also copy and paste from the exam, group 2 minimum age equals 65, let senior or affordable housing equal senior or affordable housing, let eligible conditions array equals, and we'll open square bracket, and this is where we're going to grab data from a Google Doc that I created and I referred to and gave this URL at the start of the exam. Go back and take a look at the very start of the exam. You'll see that URL was bit.ly/ and this is all lowercase, data dash for FOR dash vaccine dash questions. So I've already pasted that in. This is the Google Doc that's got all of my data. I'm going to highlight all of these strings underneath eligible conditions array, copy them, return to my playground, paste them in between the square brackets. That's all you need to do. And one more constant, we'll say let minimum number of group 2 medical conditions equals 2. So that's phase 2 question 1. Now let's do phase 2 question 2. So here we're going to write code to change the eligible variable to true. Remember, that's initialized to false. We copied that over. If any of the following conditions are met, age is greater than or equal to the group 2 minimum age, occupation equals senior or affordable housing, or the patient condition array contains the minimum number of group 2 medical conditions or more of the conditions in the eligible conditions array. Now you can always assume that the eligible conditions array will have at least one element in the array, but the patient conditions array might contain no elements. Now you'll also want to keep count of the number of eligible conditions that are in the patient conditions array using a variable named eligible conditions count. But note, you can't simply complete part C with a simple count of the patient conditions array, since this array might contain conditions that aren't in the eligible conditions array. So you need to look at each patient condition, if there are any, in the patient conditions array to see if it is a qualifying condition. Also note that it is possible that a patient might have no conditions listed in the patient conditions array. So you need to check that and make sure that your code isn't going to break if there are no patient conditions. So be sure to test these possible outcomes to make sure that your code works correctly. Now, once you've evaluated if it is true or not that a patient is eligible based on those conditions above, then print out the message as appropriate. So either you are eligible for the vaccine or you are not eligible for the vaccine. You need to be at least 65 years old or have 2 eligible medical conditions or work in senior or affordable housing. Now be sure to use the following constants when printing the statement above. This would allow a developer to update the code to easily change these values without having to worry about changing the literals in your print statement. So use group 2 minimum age, senior or affordable housing, minimum number of group 2 medical conditions. So with that stated, let's head back over to the playground and code this up. So first we'll put in our comment, and we can copy and paste from the exam. So we'll say var eligible condition count equals 0. So this is where we keep a running total of the number of conditions that the patient has that are eligible for the vaccine. Then we'll test to see if age is greater than group 2 minimum age, open and close curly, and if that's true, we'll set eligible equals to true. Actually, it's age greater than or equal to group 2 minimum age. Then otherwise, we'll test again to see else if occupation equals senior or affordable housing, open and close curly, and that will set eligible equal to true as well. Otherwise, we'll say else, open and close curlies, and we're going to test out in here. First, we'll see if patient's condition array.count is greater than 0. So we want to make sure that we've got something in our eligible conditions array. If not, then we know we can't consider eligible conditions because we don't have any. But if we do have a condition in our patient conditions array, then we're going to loop through all of the eligible conditions, which is the patient conditions array. We'll say for condition in patient condition array, open and close curlies. And then as we loop through all of the conditions in our patient conditions array, this is the conditions that the patient has, we'll say if eligible conditions array, so these are the eligible conditions, dot contain, so if the eligible conditions contains the current condition as we loop through the patient's condition, then in open and close curly, we're going to increment our eligible condition count by 1, so we can say eligible condition count equals eligible condition count plus 1, which is also the same as eligible conditions count plus equals 1, and after we've gone through this for loop and we've compared all of the patient conditions to see if those are available in the eligible conditions array, and we've incremented if that's the case, then we'll test if eligible conditions count is greater than or equal to 2. Actually, what I should have done is instead of saying the literal 2, I should have said minimum number of group 2 medical conditions. But if you put in the literal, I'll accept that. And then inside of the curlies, that will be eligible equals true. So we've met that condition as well. So we test for all 3 of the conditions above, and now we're ready to print things out. So we'll say if eligible, open and close curlies, and we'll say print, and then copy and paste our phrase that says you are eligible for the vaccine, else, open and close curlies, We'll say print, and then we'll copy this other phrase in and we'll paste it in that says you are not eligible for the vaccine. You need to be at least, and then we'll put a string interp in here, and instead of 65 years, we'll say group 2 minimum age years old, or have at least, and instead of the 2 in here, we'll do a string interp and we'll say minimum number of group 2 medical conditions, or work in, and instead of typing in the literal senior or affordable housing, we'll use our constant senior or affordable housing. And so let's first test this with age equals 65. So if I do a shift enter down below, you are eligible for the vaccine. Excellent. But if we change age to 64, do a shift enter down below, you are not eligible for the vaccine. You need to be at least 65 years old or have 2 eligible medical conditions or work in senior or affordable housing. So all the constants are working properly in our print statement. Excellent. So now let's test this out, but let's put in some incorrect or ineligible medical conditions. So we'll say the conditions are baldness and colored blindness. So those are not in there. We'll also set the occupation to equal professor. We'll do a shift enter down below. We see the screen flashes and we also get you are not eligible for the vaccine. So now let's put in a couple of eligible conditions. So we'll say after baldness, how about COPD and obesity? Do a shift enter down below and we see you are eligible for the vaccine. Excellent, our code's working great. And now finally, I'm gonna wipe out all of the patient conditions in the array, but I'm gonna copy and paste an eligible condition in here. How about senior or affordable housing? Do a shift enter. You are eligible for the vaccine. Code is working great. So that completes the phase 2 playground. I'm just gonna get rid of the occupation up here so that I've got no string in there. Now we're ready for our phase 3 playground. So just like before, we're gonna create a new playground, but we'll call this one phase 3, and we're gonna copy over the code from Q1 so that we have our variables age, patient conditions array, occupation, and eligible. So we'll head back to Xcode, highlight and copy all these values in Q1, then I can close this playground, then I can head up under the File menu and select File, New, Playground. Name this phase 3, save it to the desktop again, expand the window, I can hide this pane on the left-hand side, and over the var string, I'm going to paste over my Q1 variables. Now let's head back and take a look at the first question, phase 3 Q1. Group 3 states that the vaccine is eligible to anyone who has one or more of the qualifying medical conditions, has an occupation listed in the qualifying industries list, which you can find in the Google Doc referred to at the start of this exam, and will also approve anyone who meets the prior Group 2 minimum age of 65. So let's create constants that we'll use for these conditions. That'll be Group 2 minimum age, which should be set to 65. Even though we're in Group 3, we'll also accept patients that are in the Group 2 minimum age. Now we also want to set up an eligible conditions array. We can copy the array that we created in phase 2's playground and we can paste it in here if you'd like. This is a string array that contains medical conditions considered for vaccine eligibility. Remember, these conditions are in the Google Doc referred to at the start of the exam as well. We also want to set minimum number of Group 3 medical conditions to 1, and we want to set an eligible occupations array, which is a string array containing the industries that qualify for vaccine eligibility during this phase. Now we can also find these conditions in the Google Doc referred to at the start of the exam. Now back in our playground, we'll add our comment phase 3 Q1, and then we'll add our constant let group 2 minimum age equals 65. Let eligible conditions array equals, and we'll put in open and close square brackets, and we'll head over to our browser. We've got these eligible conditions highlighted, copy them, return to our playground, paste them in. Then under that, we'll say let, and I'm going to highlight and copy this minimum number of Group 3 medical conditions, paste it in, and set that equal to 1. Then copy this next constant name, eligible occupations array. We'll say let, paste that in there, equals, open and close square brackets, head over to our browser, highlight all of these eligible occupations, copy them, head back to the playground, paste them in, looking good. And so now we're ready for phase 3 question 2. So as before, we're going to add a variable to keep account of the conditions that we'll test to see if a person has the number of eligible conditions for phase 3 for the vaccine rollout. We're going to use the variable name eligible conditions count as we did before, which should initially be set to 0. Then we're going to write code to change the eligible variable to 2 if any of the following conditions are met. So if the patient conditions array contains the minimum number of Group 3 medical conditions or more of the conditions in the eligible conditions conditions array. Now we can always assume that the eligible conditions array will have at least one element in the array, but the patient conditions array, remember, might contain no elements. Now we're going to keep count of the number of eligible conditions that are in the patient condition array using that variable we mentioned above, eligible conditions count. Now the new criteria here is we're going to check to see if the occupation is an element in the eligible occupations array, or if the patient meets the earlier group 2 minimum age, which would have made him eligible for phase 2. Now, as we mentioned earlier, you can't complete Part C with a simple count of the patient conditions array, since this array might contain conditions that aren't in the eligible conditions array. Remember our baldness and colorblindness. So you need to look at every patient condition, if any, in the patient condition array to see if it is a qualifying condition. Also note that it's possible, as with before, that the patient might have no conditions listed in their patient condition array. So be sure to test these conditions to make sure that your code works properly. And once you've evaluated if it is true or not that the patient is eligible based on the conditions above, print out the following message as appropriate. You are eligible for the vaccine, or you are not eligible for the vaccine. You need to have at least one eligible medical condition or work in one of the qualifying occupations. And unlike the earlier exercise, here it's going to be okay if you use literal strings in the print statement above, even though in a production app, you'd want to replace the literal 1 with a minimum number of group 3 medical conditions and deal with a possible plural for the word condition or conditions. Now, you proved your ability to do this in the prior playground, so to save time, you don't need to repeat that bit here, and we can just use the literal. That means just paste the string above between quotes. And so back in the playground, we'll put in our comment, phase 3 Q2, and we actually could have reused some of the code that we did before. So if you copied and pasted that, that was fine. But what we want in here is var eligible condition count equals 0. Then if patient condition array dot count is greater than 0, open and close paren. So we need to make sure that we've got a patient condition to examine. Then we'll say for condition in patient conditions array, open and close curly. We're going to go through all the patient conditions, and we'll say if eligible condition array dot contains, and we're going to look at the individual condition, open and close curlies. If that's the case, then we're going to increment eligible condition count. We can say plus equals 1, and then after this if condition, we'll say if age greater than or equal to group 2 minimum age, open and close parens, we'll set eligible equals true. Otherwise, we'll say else if eligible condition count greater than or equal to, and we'll correctly say this time, minimum number of group 3 medical conditions, open and close curlies. That also is to set eligible equals true. Else, we'll say with open and close curlies, we'll check to see if eligible occupations array dot contains occupation. Now that's the patient's occupation, and if that's true, open and close curlies, eligible equals true. And then down below we'll handle printing, so we'll say if eligible, open and close curlies, and we'll do our print with open and close double quotes. Down below else, open and close curly, print, open and close double quotes, and we could just copy and paste these phrases from the exam. You are eligible for the vaccine, and down here it's going to be you are not eligible for the vaccine. You need to have at least one eligible medical condition or work in one of the qualifying occupations. Now let's test this out. First, a 65-year-old, but with no conditions or occupation. If we go down and do a shift-enter, they should be eligible, and indeed, you are eligible for the vaccine. Change the age to 64. You are not eligible for the vaccine. Let's add some patient conditions, bad attitude, jerky, and mean. And we'll make the occupation professor. Hopefully that doesn't describe any of your professors. This time, instead of doing a shift-enter, I'll click on the square and then the play button. And we'll see again, you are not eligible for the vaccine. So let's head back to the top, and we'll change the middle condition to COPD, which is a qualifying condition. And if we do a shift-enter down below, we see you are eligible for the vaccine. Now let's remove all the conditions, but we'll change the occupation to transit. So we'll let the MBTA drivers get the vaccine. We'll do a shift-enter down below, and we see once again, you are eligible for the vaccine. Nice work. So we're done with phase 3. Now we're on to playground number 4, which is the addresses playground. So we can see here we're going to create a new playground called addresses. So let's do that. We can get rid of our phase 3 playground and create and save addresses to the desktop. And now back over here we see for question number 1, after we add our addresses Q1 comment, we're going to create a variable to hold a string array named addresses array. Now we're going to initialize this array to hold the string that you can find in the vaccination site addresses in the Google Doc referred to earlier in this exam. So let's head back over to the playground. And notice this is a variable because we're going to be changing the addresses array. So we'll say var addresses array equals open and close square bracket. Then we'll head over to our browser and we'll highlight all of these addresses. And as you take a look at these addresses, you can see that there's some issues that we want to deal with. So first of all, we've got some duplicates in here. We see St. James Street spelled S-T-R-E-E-T, but then we see a St. James Street with the S-T abbreviation at the end. We've got a Commonwealth Ave and a Commonwealth Avenue. We've got 2 Electric Aves, so we're going to want to clean that stuff up as well. But first, let's highlight all of these street names, copy them, head back over to our playground, and paste between our square brackets. Question 1 is done. On to addresses question 2. So what we want to do here is we want to create a function. This is the first time we're asked to create a function named printStringArray that will accept a string array referred to inside of the function by the parameter name stringArray, which will print all of the elements of the string array one after another on a separate line. Now down below, what we want to do is first we want to print out a line that says in all caps original address array. Then we want to call printStringArray, passing in our address array that we just created so that we can see every element of address array on its own line printed directly below this original address array print statement, and our output should look like this. So let's head back over to our playground. Then let's add in our comments. Oh yeah, we forgot to add it up here, so I'll just get rid of the var str and I'll say address is q1 for this first comment, and then down here we'll say address is q2. Then we define the function with the keyword func, and the name of the function is printStringArray. And then in between parentheses, the parameter that we're passing in, we're going to call stringArray, colon, and this is going to be an array of strings. So in between square brackets, we have capital string, and then we have open and close curly inside to create the body of the function. And inside the body of the function, we're going to say for string in string array, open and close curly, and inside the body of this for loop, we'll say print string. Now notice that I named this string, but I named it with a lowercase string. So that's actually different from if it were uppercase string, that's a reserved keyword for the type string. But reusing a keyword, even if you just change the upper and lowercase, isn't exactly good programming practice. So I'm going to change the first string here to string element instead. And then inside the print body, I'll say string element as well. Then down below, I'll say print and open and close double quotes. And we'll copy and paste the string from the exam in just a bit. But underneath that, I want to call the function we just created, which is printStringArray. And for the value that we're going to pass in, that's going to be our address array. Then we'll head back to our exam, highlight this phrase here, original address array, paste that into our print statement, do a shift enter, code moves up a little bit, and here we see all of those values in our address array are printed out in the console. Nice. So now for question 3, we want to write a function named fixAddressEnding that will accept a string array referred to inside of the function with the parameter named stringArray, just as before, and that is now going to return a string array. So this time we're returning a value. It's going to be a string array, and this function is going to examine all of the elements in the array that we passed in. And if the element ends in AVE period, we're going to replace that with avenue. If it ends in ST period, we're going to replace that with street. And if it ends in RD period, we're going to replace that with road. Now, the string array returned by the function will have the ending for each element properly corrected. So that's what we want to do. We want to return a string array that corrects the values that we pass into it. And it will return a new string array with those strings corrected. Then we're going to show the result. So first we're going to print out a single print statement that contains a line feed so that there is a blank line. Remember how to do that. We use an escaped character, and that's \n for line feed, followed by the text corrected address ending. And to be clear, there's just one print statement in the line feed with corrected address ending as part of that statement, not 2 print statements. And if you can't do that in a single print statement, then you'd get partial credit. And then what we're going to do is we're going to call fixAddressEnding. We're going to pass in our address array. We're going to assign the results returned by this function back into address array, so that should update our address array. Then we're going to call the function that we wrote earlier called printStringArray. We're going to pass in our address array that we just updated, so this should print out every single element in address array on its own line, printing it below corrected address ending, but remember, this is going to have all of the endings corrected. So hopefully this is straightforward. Let's head back over to our playground. We'll add in our comment, address is q3, and we'll define this function with the func keyword. We're going to name it fixAddressEnding. We're going to pass in a string array that we're going to call stringArray, colon, that's bracket string, and then we're going to return a value. So we want to write our arrow, and then that's going to be bracket with string inside as well, open and close curlies. And now remember, we cannot change the value of the string array that we pass in because string array is going to be a constant. So what we want to do on the inside is we want to create a new variable. We'll say var, and we'll call this new array, colon, and then we're going to set this up so that it's an empty array at first. So we'll say in bracket string equals, open and close square bracket, so we've got an empty string array. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go through all of the elements of the string array that we pass in. So we'll say for string element in string array, open and close curlies. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take that string element and we're going to create a new variable. We'll call it new string. Now we're going to assign this new string as an element to our new array, which is initially empty. But the reason why we set this up as a variable here first, and we say var new string equals string element, is we're going to check to see if it's got a funky ending. And if it does, we'll change new string. So first we'll say if string element dot has suffix. Now remember what this does. Take a look at code completion. We're going to pass in a string and this returns a bool. So if it has the suffix, meaning it ends in whatever string we pass in, it's going to give us a true. Otherwise, it's going to give us false. So in between double quotes, we'll say capital A, VE period, and then open and close curlies. If that's the case, then this is going to be true. And if it's true, in between the curlies, we'll just say new string dot remove last. Now we have two options for remove last, but if we choose the second one in here, we can pass in the number of characters that we want to remove at the end of this string. There are 4 characters in AVE period, so we'll put a 4 in between these parentheses. At that point, we've removed AVE period, so what we want to do now is we want to add in avenue, so we'll just say new string equals new string plus and the string avenue. Then right underneath that, we'll do essentially the same thing. We'll say else if, I'm going to copy and paste what I did for AVE period up here, but I'm going to change AVE to capital ST period. I'm going to copy and paste the center part of the clause above, but instead of saying new string dot remove last 4, I'm going to say new string remove last 3 because ST period has only 3 characters, and I'm going to change new string equals new string plus, and this time it's going to be street, STREET. Then I can copy this whole clause above, paste it down below, but I can change my has suffix to RD period, and it still has 3 characters that I want to remove at the end, but I want to replace that with the full phrase road. Now, after the last clause in this if, else, if, what we want to do is we want to take our new array and dot append the new string. So this should be the corrected string for the string element in the string array that we're iterating through. And then just before the closing curly in this function, we want to return new array. So that's got all the elements in string array, but remember what we've done in this if, else, if with the new array dot append is we've made any corrections if we need to, and we've made sure that we appended that corrected element from string array into our new array. So we've got as many elements in our new array as we did in our string array, but all the endings are corrected. Now down below, we're ready to say print, and what do we need here? Let's highlight this phrase, corrected address endings, copy it, paste it in, but remember how we do a line feed, that's going to be \n. And then below this, we're going to assign address array equal to the result of fix address ending when we pass in address array. So we pass in address array, we're going to get back this array, which was our new array. Now, new array doesn't exist outside the function. It's got just the scope inside of the function, but we're going to return all of those values. And we're going to assign all of those values that we return back into our address array. So we effectively update our address array. Then we just call our print string array function, passing in address array, which should be updated at this point with the endings fixed. We'll do a shift return, and look at that. We see we've got our addresses fixed. Everything in here is the full avenue, street, or road. And if you scroll up, you can compare the original address output with our corrected address endings. Nice. Now let's head back to the exam, and we want to do question 4, and this wants us to write a function named remove duplicates that will accept a string array that we're going to refer to once again inside our function with the parameter named string array, and this should also return a string array, and this function is going to return a string array that contains all of the elements of the string array that we pass in, but without any duplicate elements. So we're removing duplicates just like the name of the function says. Now there are a bunch of ways to do this. My expectation is that you would use a for loop, but if you used some other method and it worked, that's fine. There are some advanced techniques that we didn't have a chance to discuss yet in class that can do this a little bit more efficiently, but once you call this, there shouldn't be any duplicates. You'll get full credit, whatever you do, as long as it could remove any duplicates in any string array. And now when you show your result, what we want to do is to create a single print statement once again, which uses that line feed escaped character. We want to have the phrase no duplicates in that same single print statement. Then we want to call remove duplicates, passing in our address array, assigning the results to address array, and we're going to call print string array, passing in the updated address array. And this should show us our perfect set of addresses with no duplicates and the proper ending for address, road, and street. So let's head back over to our playground and get this done. So we'll put in our comment, address is Q4, and then we'll write our function with the keyword func, and we're going to call this remove duplicates. And in between the parentheses, we're going to call our parameter string array again with a colon. We're passing in an array of strings, so that's bracket capital string, and we're going to return a string array, so that's an arrow with bracket string as well. Open and close curlies. On the inside of this, we're going to do very similar to what we did above. We're first going to define a new array, which is an empty string array, var new array colon bracket capital string equals, and then open and close square bracket. And now what we're going to do is we're going to loop through every element of string array. That's the array that we pass in. And we'll do this in a for loop. So we'll say for string element in string array, open and close curlies. Now, if that element doesn't exist inside of new array yet, then we're going to append that element to our new array. And we can do that with the statement if new array dot contains string element equals false. Now, instead of saying equals false, we could put an exclamation point in front of the new array here, but that'll be the same thing. So if it's true that new array does not contain the string element, that's essentially what we're doing when we say new array dot contain string element equals false, then in between the curlies, what we're going to do is, hey, we don't have this string element in our new array, so we're going to append string element to new array dot append string element. But if we take a look and find that element that we're looking at in the string array already exists in the new array, then we're not going to append it. We're just going to skip over it. So we're going to look at each of the elements one by one. At first, everything that we add into our new array is going to be a brand new element. But if we find an element in our string array that we've already added to our new array, then we're going to skip over that and not append it. Then just before the closing curly, we say return new array. The function's done, so we can say print, and then \n, no duplicates in the same statement. And then down below, we'll assign address array equal to the return value from remove duplicates, passing in address array. And then down below that, we'll print string array, passing in our new updated address array. We'll do shift and enter. And if we take a look at the results, we can scroll up. And if we take a look in no duplicates, we see we only have one St. James Street, one Electric Avenue, and one Commonwealth Avenue. Nice! Addresses Playground complete. Up next, the Structs Playground. So we're going to create a new playground named Structs, and then we're going to create a struct called patient that should hold information on a given patient, which we'll eventually use to determine vaccine eligibility. Now this struct should contain the following elements: first name, a string, last name, a string, age, which is a whole number, which we know is an int, occupation, which is a string, and patient condition array, which is an array of strings. So let's head back over to our playground. We can close the existing playground. We can create a new playground. We'll call this struct, save it to the desktop, put in our comment, and we declare a new struct with the keyword struct. We're going to call this patient. The convention is upper camel case, so that's capital P patient, open and close curlies, and I'm going to declare but not initialize my 5 properties. You could initialize them if you want to, but we wouldn't use that initialization. So I'm just going to say var first name colon string, var last name colon string, var age colon int, var occupation colon string, and var patient conditions array colon, and that's square bracket with string inside because it's an array of strings. Back to the quiz. Question 2, we want to create an empty array of patient structs, and we want to call this patient array. So back to our playground, put in our comment structs2, And the way that we initialize this empty array is just var, and we'll call this lower camel case patient array, colon, and then inside of brackets, we have capital patient. So again, we have an array of the patient struct that we just created equals open and close bracket. So now question 3 is a setup for question 4. So we say in question 3, in the next question, question 4, we're going to prove that your patient array will work by populating it with data from standard arrays that contain data provided for you in the Google Doc at the URL that we gave you at the beginning of the exam. So to do this, what we need to do in question 3 is to create 5 arrays in your code that contain data that we'll later use in the next question to populate the patient array. So note that the data in the Google Doc is on a single line, and it's okay to copy and paste a single line even though the elements aren't on separate lines. This will keep the size of your code smaller. There's no need to add a line or line breaks after each element in the array. And what we're going to do is create these 5 arrays. First name array, this is going to be a string array that contains the data under first name array. Last name array is a string array with the data under last name array. Age array has the whole number data or the int data that's under age array. Occupation array is a string array containing the data under occupation array. And finally, conditions array. And if you take a look at it, this is an array of string arrays containing all of the recorded conditions that a patient has. Now at this point you might say, wait, what? An array of arrays? Can you do this? And the answer is yes. Just place all of the data entirely inside of the very same marks that we use to create an array. So those are the square bracket marks, and you have created an array of arrays. So every element in the conditions array will then be a single array of strings. Cool. Let's try this out. Head back over to our playground. We'll type in our comment structs 3, and then we'll say var first name array equals, and then in between the square brackets, we'll head back over to our Google Doc, find the first name array, highlight and copy all of this data, and paste it in between the square brackets in our playground. Then we'll do the same, var last name array equals, open and close square bracket, head to the doc, copy the last name array, paste it back in between the square brackets. Then we'll say var age array equals, in between the square brackets, we'll copy and paste this age array data. Then var occupation array equals, in between the square brackets, we'll copy and paste this occupations array data. Then we'll say var conditions array equals, and then if we take a look at our test, we can see, hey, this is going to be an array of string arrays. But we can create this by using the very same marks that we use to create any other array. Those are our square brackets. So head back to the playground, add those square brackets, head over to the Google Doc, and if you look at the data in here, you can see that the square brackets, which are arrays, are themselves separated by commas. So down here where you see the second to last array, that's deceitful, nasty, and COPD, those are 3 strings that are inside of brackets, and then the comma after that separates that from the last array, which is a 1-element array of agoraphobic. So this is indeed a bunch of arrays that are separated by commas. We'll highlight this, we'll copy it, we'll head back to the playground and paste it in between the square brackets. And even though we're not doing anything with this data, if we do a shift enter right now, we will execute our code, and we can see over here in the right-hand pane, there's data in that pane, which suggests, yep, our code ran, and we don't have any errors. So let's head back over to our test, and we can see question 4 says, know that the arrays have the same number of elements and that these match up for the data about a single person. So for example, the person at index value 3, which is the 4th element in all of these arrays, should have the data first name array 3, last name array 3, age array 3, occupation array 3, and patient conditions array 3. So use this knowledge to use all of the data in all 5 of the arrays that we've just created containing the data above to populate elements of patient's array. That's that empty array of patient types, so that each element of patient's array is a patient struct containing the appropriate values of the array. For example, when done, the patient array element at index 3 should have the data, and you'll see similar results showing the proper data from the arrays put in the correct patient struct element in patient array. So first name Penny, last name Wise, age 64, occupation retired, conditions immunocompromised, and obesity. Well, we know we've just got to go through a loop and then create a patient object with an element from each of these different arrays. So let's head over to the playground and get this done, and we'll add our comment structs Q4, and let's figure out how many elements we have in these arrays. So they all have the same number of elements, so we'll set let array count equal, and we can choose any array here, but I'll just say first name array array.count. Any of those last 5 arrays that we've added should have the same count. So now we've got it in this constant that we just created named array count. And now that we know the number of elements in the array, we can use that to create an index in a for loop. So we can say for I, which is our index, in 0, array count minus 1, open and close curlies. So we'll use this I as an index value so that we can access all the elements in all these different arrays, starting with element 0 through element array count minus 1. Then what we'll do inside of this array is we'll create a new patient value. So we'll say let new patient equals, and then capital patient, and look at what happens when we type an open parenthesis. Just like when we were creating elements in our card struct in class, or when you were working through EU examples that were part of the to-do list video. So we can see what this does is it will create a new patient, and we pass in an element for each of the properties in the patient struct, and what we get out of the end here with the arrow is a new patient struct. So we'll press return, and that capital patient with the open parenthesis here says, hey, go to the struct factory and create me a new patient struct, and we see all the different properties in there. So for first name, we can say first name array, bracket I bracket, last name is going to be last name array, bracket I bracket, age is going to be age array, bracket I bracket, occupation is going to be occupation array, bracket I bracket, and patient condition array is going to be conditions array. And if we take a look in code completion, we can see conditions array is in fact an array of string arrays. See the nested square brackets inside of square brackets? That's totally okay though. If we say conditions array, bracket I bracket, this is going to give us an individual string array for every element in conditions array. So now that we created a new patient struct, what do we want to do? We want to append it to our empty patient array. So we just say patient array.append new patient, and that's it. If we do a shift return at the end, we have no output to the console, but we can see over here on the right-hand side, we've iterated through this 25 times. We get no errors, so our code seems to be working. Let's head back over and take a look at the next exam question. So now we want to write code to iterate through our patient array, which now has data in it, and we want to print each patient so that the output in the console looks something like this. So the first name, martial law, age 75, occupation retired, conditions, he's got none. The next name is Bowring, the age is 74, the occupation is retired, the conditions are none. And then if you take a look at the last two, you got up to no good, age 27, occupation marketing, conditions deceitful, nasty, and COPD. And the last one is Doris Shut, age 32, occupation funeral director, and conditions agoraphobic. So we just want to loop through the array, and we want to print out some string interpolation that prints every element in the array. So back over in our playground, we'll enter our comment, and then we'll iterate through the patient array by saying for patient in patient array, open and close curlies, and we'll say print with some string interpolation in between the quotes, name colon string interp space string interp, comma age colon string interp, comma occupation colon string interp, comma conditions colon string interp. And in the first string interp, we'll say patient.first name, then patient.last name, age is patient.age, occupation is patient.occupation, and not surprisingly, conditions is patient.patient conditions array. Now we can take a look at our output by doing a shift enter, and down here in the console, we see our results. We've got martial law, Bowring, page turner, and if we scroll to the end, you got geriatric, up to no good, and doors shut. Excellent work. On to question 6. So question 6 says use the code from phase 1 playground. You can open this up and copy the code and paste it into the current playground. And we're going to create a function named phase 1 eligible that accepts a patient struct. It's a single parameter, which we should refer to as lowercase patient, so that'll be the name of the parameter. And this function should do the same thing as the code in phase 1.playground. So it should check the patient age against the group 1 minimum age, and then print a statement if the person is eligible or if they're not eligible for the vaccine. Now, you'll only have to make some minor changes in your original code to work with the patient struct named patient, and then after we've done that, we want to print out a statement that has a blank line and then phase 1 eligibility check, and then we want to write code to loop through all of the patients in the patient array, calling the phase 1 eligible function that we just wrote, and the results should look something like this output below. So, let's head over to our playground. We'll add our comment structs q6, and then we'll define this function func phase 1 eligible. We're going to pass in one parameter called patient, colon, and that's of type capital patient. That's our new struct. Then open and close curly, and then let's open up our phase 1 playground. So a fast way to do that is to go File, Open Recent, Phase 1 Playground. Now remember I mentioned this version of Xcode. It's possible that you open Phase 1 Playground and it's completely blank. If it is, just close it and open it up again, and you should see the code in there. Now the code that we're going to need is from the var eligible equals false all the way through the end. So we don't need the 3 variables in the beginning because now we've got a struct to be able to hold the age and the patient condition array and the occupation. But with this code highlighted, I'm going to copy it with a Command C. Then I'm going to close this playground and I'm going to paste this in between the curlies of my function. Now, if you wait a second, Xcode will actually flag everything that we need to change. What I'll do here first, though, is I'll clear out all of these extra comments that I don't need. And I see Xcode's giving me an error that says it can't find age in scope. Well, that's because we're passing in patient, so we want to refer to patient.age, not just age. In fact, I can highlight the patient dot and copy that because I know I'm going to need to paste that down below. I see Xcode has got a red underline just at the start of this age variable down here, so I'm just going to paste patient dot in front of that. The error goes away. I'll do the same in front of this age. That error goes away. Super easy. Back in our test, we can see we want to print a blank line and then phase 1 eligibility check, so I'm going to highlight and copy that phrase. Head back to my playground, and I'll type in print, and in between the double quotes, \n so that I do a line feed, and then paste in phase 1 eligibility check, and then I'm going to loop through, iterating through patient array. So I'll say for patient in patient array, open and close curlies, and then we'll just print out, and in between the double quotes, string interp, patient.firstname space string interp, patient.lastname, and then just below this, we'll call phase 1 eligible, passing in patient, which is the element in our for loop, do a shift return, and take a look at this. We see our phase 1 eligibility check. Martial law is eligible. Bow ring is not old enough for the vaccine, needs to be 1 year older. We see page turner's not old enough. You need to be 11 years. Look at the plural, older. So this output is just as we said it would be in the exam. And if we take a look at the bottom, we get up to no good is not old enough for the vaccine, needs to be 48 years older, and door shut is not old enough, needs to be 43 years older. Looking good. Let's go on to the next question. So for the last part of the Structs Playground, we're going to use the code this time from Phase 2 Playground. We can open that up and copy the code and paste it into the current playground, and we're going to use that to create a function named Phase 2 Eligible. This is going to accept a patient struct as a single parameter, which we will once again call patient. Now this function should do the same thing as the code in Phase 2, and once again, we should only have to make some minor changes to the original code to get it to work with the patient struct named patient. And what we want to do after we have set up this function is we're going to set up a print statement that will print both a blank line and then phase 2 eligibility check. Then we're going to loop through all of the patients in patient array so we can iterate through that array again, calling this time phase 2 eligible, and the results should look just as we see them printed below. So now let's head back over to our playground and finish up our last playground. Then we'll enter our comment, structs q7, and then we'll declare our function with func phase 2 eligible, the name of the function, open parens. Our parameter is going to be called lowercase patient, colon, and we're passing in uppercase patient, which is the name of the struct, open and close curlies. And now let's open our phase 2 playground. And I'm going to highlight from var eligible equals false, just like before, and I'll copy all of the code through the last curly. And now that I've copied this, I can close this playground, and I'm going to paste all of this code in between the curlies of my new function. Now, just like before, I can get rid of any extra comments, and I can see my first error down here again is age, which is flagged, so I know that I need to put in lowercase patient dot in front of that. The error goes away. I'm going to highlight patient dot, copy it, and I can see down here in the else if occupation has a little red underscore underneath it, so I'll paste patient dot in front of that. The error goes away. Then in the else condition, I've got 2 errors. So one is this patient condition array dot count. I've got to paste patient dot in front of that. And then similarly down below in the for loop, I've got to paste patient dot in front of patient condition array there as well. So Swiftmeisters, that's our function. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy the print and the iterate through the patient array from the question number 6, and I'm going to paste that below because I just have to modify some of these lines. We'll change phase 1 eligibility check to phase 2 eligibility check, and instead of calling the function phase 1 eligible, we'll call phase 2 eligible, shift return, and will you look at that, there's phase 2 eligibility check, Martial law is eligible, bow ring is eligible, page turner, you are not eligible for the vaccine. You need to be at least 65 years or older, and you have to have 2 medical conditions, so it just prints out the string. These are the results that the exam tells us we should be getting, so you had a little bit of a hint there. Scroll down to the very end, we see geriatric is eligible for the vaccine, but up to no good and doors shut are not eligible for the vaccine. Looking good. All 5 of our playgrounds are done. Hopefully that went well for you. Now let's build that app. So we're going to build this very simple app. Again, it just shows that you can incorporate some code into some user interface elements. The next half of the class, we're going to do a lot of work in UIKit. But right now, what we're going to do is just create a new Xcode project for a very, very basic app. We'll call this vaccine check. And also, since we're time constrained on our exam, in the interest of time, I'm not even going to require you to set constraints in this app. So why don't you just go ahead and design on a 2nd generation iPhone SE and also build and run on a 2nd generation iPhone SE. That's how we're going to go ahead and we're going to grade this. So you don't have to worry about constraints. So if we head back over to Xcode, we can close out of the playground. We can head up under File, New Project. We'll create a new project. Again, we'll call this vaccine check. Save it to the desktop. Just to the right of where it says vaccine check up here, I'm going to select the scheme as iPhone SE 2nd edition. Then I'm going to head over to main storyboard, and under view as, I'm going to set the device to iPhone SE 2nd edition as well. Then let's head back and take a look at the questions. So the first part is to set up the user interface, and we're going to create an app that looks like the one at the right. We're going to lay out the user interface just as it's shown here. To help you quickly create the user interface, you can copy the strings that you see below and paste them into the text for the appropriate labels. So under I have at least 2 of these conditions, these are all of the conditions, and under I work for one of these professions, these are all the professions. Also, the element to the right of the age label is a text field. You should refer to that in your code as age text field. That means create an IB outlet with that name. In your code, you should refer to the switch to the right of I have at least one of these conditions as condition switch. You should refer to the switch to the right of I work in one of these professions as profession switch. And in your code, you should also refer to the label at the very bottom of the view controller as eligibility label. And refer to the code that executes when you click on the check eligibility button as check button pressed, so that means that's got to be an IB action. So let's set that up. So over in Xcode, we'll open up the library, we'll find a label, and we'll add it in the upper left corner, adjacent to the margins. Then under the attributes inspector, we'll change the label to age : press return. Then we'll find a text field. We'll position that just to the right of the label. I'll stretch the right side out so that it touches the right margin in the view controller. Then we'll add another label below that. I'll use the margins here just underneath the text field above it and to the left and right of the view controller. Then I can copy and paste the text from the exam. So we'll change label so that it says I have at least 2 of these conditions. Then we're going to position a switch to the right. So I'll find that in the library. I'll align that to the right, and just below the text field above it, I'll adjust the size of the label. Not that it's important, but I'll set the number of lines in that label to 0 so that it can expand. I'll adjust the bottom border of this label. Then I'll duplicate the label above and just stretch this out to give a little bit more room. Then I'm going to go back to the exam and I'm going to copy the different conditions, head back over in the attributes inspector for the new label. I'm going to paste in all of those conditions, press return, and then I can resize this label so that I can see all the conditions. Then if I draw a selection box around these 2 labels and the switch and then press Command D, I'll duplicate all 3 of those elements, and I can click on this label up here that used to say I've got one of these conditions. I'll delete the text that's in there now, head back to the exam, and I'm going to highlight I work in one of these professions. I'll paste that in as the new text inside of this label and press return. Not to be too fussy, but I can resize this label. Then I'll move up these conditions here, head back over to the exam, highlight the professions, copy them, and paste them back into the attributes of this particular label. So this is looking good. Now I want to go up and add a button. I'm going to position that just below this last label here, stretch it out a little bit, and the button text is going to be check eligibility. I'll stretch out the button and center it, but again, you don't have to get too fussy. And I'll access one more label here. I'll align this just below the button, then stretch it out to the left and right margin. Then I'll stretch out the bottom so that that touches the bottom margin in the view controller. I'll put some placeholder text in here that just says eligibility result here. I'm going to clear that out in my view did load. I'll make sure that that's centered, and I didn't necessarily say that you had to increase the font here, but I'm going to make it look a little bit bigger, so I'll increase that to, 28 points sounds good. Now I'll get into Assistant Editor mode by clicking first on ViewController.Swift, then Option clicking on Main Storyboard, and I'm going to create an IB outlet for my text field. I'm going to call this Age Text Field. I'm going to create an IB outlet for each of my switches. The first one is going to be called the Condition Switch. The second one is going to be called the Profession Switch. And then lastly, I need to create an IB outlet for this last label down here, and we're going to call this the eligibility label. Again, we're control dragging over to create these outlets. We've been doing it from our very first day in class, so none of this should be new to you. It's a way to get some real easy points here. And finally, what we're going to do is just before the last curly, we'll control drag over from the button. We're going to create an IB action, and we'll call this action check button pressed. Now we can close our main storyboard, and we're ready to code. Now in view.did_load, I can get rid of this comment that I don't need, and I want to set my eligibility label.text equal to the empty string so that my dummy text isn't in there when I start my app up. Then let's head over to our test and take a look at the other things that we need to do. It says that the two switches should be set to the off position, and there should be no text in the age text field. So under super view.did_load, we'll just say condition switch.isOn equals false and profession switch.isOn equals false. That sets both of those switches to off, just like our class exercise. And I'm also noticing in here I set eligibility label.text equal to the empty string, which is what I wanted you to do. You don't need to go ahead and set age text field.text to the empty string, but that's what I asked you to do in the exam. So clearly you shouldn't lose any points if you did not set eligibility label.text equal to the empty string. You're not responsible for my errors. Then back over here in our test, I mentioned that you should copy these 5 lines of code and paste them just under super view.did_load. What this is going to do is it will dismiss the keyboard, paste it under super view.did_load, and we're not going to have any problems with dismissing the keyboard now. This code snippet is very much like a software Lego, so you'll be able to copy and paste it into just about any of the code that you write. Now, I also point out that you can copy the lines below because the text contains emojis, and when the button is clicked, the contents of eligibility label should show as, with this emoji here, not eligible unless any of these conditions are true. If the age entered is greater than or equal to 65, if the condition switch is set, meaning that the patient has one of the listed conditions, or if the profession switch is set, meaning that the patient works in one of the listed professions. So if any of those conditions is true, then we need to set the contents of eligibility label to the green check mark with eligible next to it. And note, since the user can enter a non-numeric number in age text field, then you should assume that any age that can't be converted into a whole number is 0. Otherwise, you should convert the value in age text field into a whole number and use this in the calculation above. If you can't properly work with the age, then skip the age for partial credit. Now I'm going to copy this block of text that I've highlighted with a cancel emoji, head back into Xcode, and in check button pressed, I'll add the code eligibility label.text equals, and in between double quotes, I'll paste that text in. And now just below this, remember I'd said that we want to convert what is in the age text field.text into an integer. And if it's not an integer, well, then we should set the age to 0. So we're actually going to start off setting the age to 0. We'll say var age equals 0. And then underneath, we're going to convert the text of the age text field, so it's .text property, into an integer. And remember, that might not work. And if it doesn't work, we're going to get a nil. So one of the best things for us to use here is if let. We can say if let converted age equals int, open parentheses, and then inside we can put in age text field.text. If you forgot an exclamation point at the end, Xcode will tell you that we need that. And as a reminder what's going on here, we can actually read it from the right side of the equal sign. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to convert age text field.text into an integer. Now, if that works, we get a non-nil value. We'll create a constant called converted age. So that's what if let does. Now, if we get a nil value, we can't create that constant, and we'll skip after the curlies that we're going to put after this if let statement. But if we do get a non-nil value, we have something in converted age that's an integer, so in between the curlies we'll say age equals converted age. That means we took our value from our age text field, we successfully converted it into an int, and we no longer have age equals 0. Unless, of course, these are typed to 0 in that field. Then down below, we have to test for one of 3 conditions where we'll say that the person is eligible for vaccine. So we'll just use a single if statement here. You could have used if and else if, but I'll just say if age greater than or equal to 65, then bar bar, which is our logical or, condition switch dot is on, bar bar, profession switch dot is on, open and close curlies. And so if any of the 3 statements that we have in here is true, we'll execute what's in between the curlies, and in there we'll put eligibility label.text equals, and in between the double quotes, I'm going to paste in the green check mark, eligible. Now, Swifters, we can go ahead and build and run. Hammer time, no errors in the app, and we can test this out. If I click check eligibility right away, we get not eligible because we don't have any conditions that are true. Type in the number 65. Check eligibility, we're eligible. Type in the word 65, that is not a number, so we get not eligible. If your keyboard isn't showing, you can go under I/O in the simulator and select keyboard and toggle software keyboard, or you can type Command K. That should pull up the keyboard if it's not showing. So here we go, we can see the keyboard. By the way, if we click anywhere outside of our text field, that's where that little software Lego code that we pasted into view did load comes in, and it dismisses the keyboard for us. Now if I select this first switch here that I've got one of the 2 conditions below and check eligibility, I am now eligible again. Check the second switch for professions, but turn off the first switch for conditions. We're still eligible. Turn them both on, we're eligible. Let me turn them both off and then type in the number 64. Check eligibility, that's not eligible. So this is working great. Now there's one more thing that we could have done for this app since we didn't want the user to type in anything other than a number. If we head back over to main storyboard, we can click on our text field, and in the attributes inspector, we can set the keyboard type as numeric pad. So this way you can't type in any text. There are some additional techniques that you could use, but if we just set this up, remember it is possible to copy and paste text in the iPhone from one app to another app. So this wouldn't make our app bulletproof, which is one of the reasons why you want to have if let in there. And again, there's some other advanced techniques that we could use to filter out anything other than numbers. You actually can probably figure these out on your own if you go back and take a look at some of the techniques that you learned in Word Garden. But if we build and run, then take a look at our app as it's running, and if we click in the text field, we can see that the keyboard only has numbers. Looking good. I hope you did well on the exam. If for some reason you didn't do well, remember we have our 70% retake option for no coder left behind. Also, make sure that you see me during office hours. If you have any questions that aren't answered in this video, keep at it, Swifter. New programmers sometimes struggle on the first exam, but the goal is to make sure that you leave with really strong programming skills, and you are in fact an iOS developer by the end of the course. Hang in there. We'll make sure that you get there. Keep at it.